The Board of Directors purchased 2 pieces this year. They received a purchase award. And let's see what the first one is. The first one was a fabric art piece, mixed media. And we were taken with this piece, first off, because of the unique use of material, both fabric and paint, and sort of the depth perception, use of color. We were intrigued by all that. We thought it was a beautiful piece of work, and it would add to our collection in sort of a missing area in fabric art. Next up, we chose the piece by Cyrus Grego, The Spider on the Web. And although it doesn't really show that much in the photographs, if you look at it more carefully in real life, you'll see that there's a really nice depth perception, 3D kind of thing going on with the web. And again, we have nothing like that in our collection. We thought that would make a great addition. All right, let's hear it for the Purchase Awards winners. At this point, it's my honor and privilege to turn the presentation announcements over to our 2 very qualified and highly esteemed judges, Heidi Jube and Amy Varsek. Let's give a round of applause. Take it away, ladies.
All right, testing. Oh, good, it works.
Do we have our own, or are we sharing? Let's see if they both work without feedback.
Testing. We'll see if we don't have feedback. Are we good? We're not squealing, so. Okay, we're good. Okay. Thank you for having us again. We're here a 2nd year in a row. Hopefully we live up to whatever you expect of us. It is nice to not have to get to know each other before we have to start jurying. You think that doesn't matter, but for some reason it is helpful to be like, we kind of knew that we didn't agree on everything last year, so we weren't going to agree on everything today. So that's a good sign, right? So I'm Heidi Jube. I'm living in the Twin Cities now, but otherwise up until last August, was in Greater Minnesota as a practicing abstract painter and public artist and art educator. So I've kind of done a lot of things. I would say about 50% of the mediums here I have done some version of at some point.
Sure. Hello, my name is Amy Varsek, and I come from Duluth, Minnesota. And I am a practicing artist as well, although I've been taking a little bit of a hiatus this last year. I'm the former exhibitions director and curator at the Duluth Art Institute, of which I'm also taking a break, and I've moved more into the realm of humanities, where I work for small organizations in the cities from my home, editing webinars and podcasts. So I'm diving into the multimedia world. And I'm super excited to be back. Thank you all so much for having the 2 of us. Like Heidi had said, it was very much easy to walk into this space and see so many returning artists and work with a judge that, like she said, we don't agree on everything. So we kind of swapped pieces a little bit here and there. And it's really great to get a different perspective. And one thing I would say, all of this work is so lovely, and obviously each artist puts so much of their heart and time into it. Please take your own time in enjoying each piece. Reach out and talk to the artists, and I invite each of the artists to talk to us after the presentation as well.
Sure. All right. Okay, so this one is Gene Crocker, The Fence. And we both resonated with this one. First of all, there's a lot of textures to it, so if you see it in person, there's layering of tissue paper, I would think, or something along those lines. And then really great ways of documenting a point in time. You know, things like as simple as scarves and backpacks kind of set the tone both for the era that it represents and also the uniqueness of those who leave it there, right? So I don't know, that one was just a really nice, it's a nostalgic one, but without it being way back in time nostalgic. It's very much now. Oh, that's yours.
The next merit award goes to Del Gross, Hanging Around. And what spoke to us about this piece is the layering of the digital imagery. There's some obvious choices happening here with the medium in that the textures aren't completely uniform. And there's this push and pull with the center image that's crisp. So if you get a chance to look at it in person, you'll see that the insects are very defined, and then the background is more abstract. So I find with those two next to each other, it creates this movement, like almost like you can feel the structures that the insects are hanging onto. You can feel those structures moving, but the insects are still. So
Can I
it's a
ask
great
you
piece.
that one? Can I ask you that one? Okay, so one thing too is that when we're dealing with process and we don't always know what the process is, and this is a piece of advice to anybody who's actually, you get stuck in the process. As artists, we always do. One of the things about this one is it still has a really interesting composition because when we looked at it over there versus when we look at it up on the screen, I don't know about you, but I looked at it now like it's a painting. Now it's flattened even more, but at the same time, it's still solid. It still has a lot of qualities to it, even though we lose a lot of the detail by it being up on the screen. So that's like that unspoken part of composition that sometimes it's in our gut as much as it's a practical application of the medium or what have you. Plus, we did bring up the whole, how many layers are here? Like, only Del really knows. But when it comes to how many layers are here, what are we layering, what's happening, we don't quite know that information, but we still enjoy it, and it captured our attention together for an extended period of time. Okay, so Nathan Pete, Ojibwe floral medallion. This one, we definitely, we both came at this, separately, but it was on our list. As I personally, I'm just talking for myself. I personally enjoy the asymmetrical nature of something that is oftentimes very symmetrical, whether it's the berries or the flower, but then also the only a couple colors, creating all the texture even around the band. Am I saying the right terms? But like the rope aspect to me is really interesting. So there's like a lot of things happening there. Plus, of course, craftsmanship was like absolutely beautiful. And we did find that with a lot of pieces is that craftsmanship on a lot of these pieces are pretty top-notch. And so sometimes we focus as much on that as we do on the piece itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that in terms of mastery of craft. And my thoughts on the symmetry of this piece, I loved how the necklace part, the band part of the medallion, it's exact mirror. The symmetry there in the coloring and the patterning, and yet in the piece itself on the medallion, we see an explosion of like just the subject surrounded by the florals, and that juxtaposition of the patterns of the symmetry versus the asymmetry, that's what really worked for me. Catherine Silverdo, the poppy field. One of the things I really loved about this piece is that each individual stroke feels very congruent, and yet there's so much texture. So even though the stroke is very repetitive, when you look closely at it, you'll see that there are some differences in the strokes, in that a lot of the strokes, the edges are parallel, some of them are a little bit skewed, but so much depth is achieved even though there's this intentional use of almost like a single stroke. And so the layering of colors brings forth this beautiful composition that just swoops across the canvas.
Okay, Robin Tingle, Pondering Space. So this one really needed the light that was shining on it. There is the depth that is created by the shadows from the light fixture. I think if you put this in a dark room, it wouldn't have the same effect. And so whatever's on the forefront or the middle, when the light hits it, it creates this sort of underwater experience where you're trying to identify what's happening further down in the depths of the water. So while you have these two frogs that sort of take up the visual space, like I can identify two frogs, okay. But when you start paying attention to the shadows and what's happening behind it, that's the best part, I think, of the whole piece, is playing around with those shadows. And I think the light on the outside really helps make those shadows happen like you would see in water.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add to that, Heidi, is that we talked about the mystery of how many layers are there. And again, going back to the lighting, the lighting allowed us to get lost and not be told exactly what we were looking at. Versus, I think if it were lit from the inside, then the layers would become more obvious and it would lose some mystery. So, our next Merit Award is Carl Long, Blowing in the Wind. And what really spoke to us about this piece is the use of material. So these are security envelopes. Please, if you hadn't had a chance to go look at this piece closely, the choices that are made in the building the textures, just by we all are familiar with security envelopes as we're getting bills in the mail and we're accumulating all of our debts. Like that goes, it's almost like a cross-hatching artist builds form through the density of their marks. Like to achieve that with a material that is provided, it's quite wonderful to see the depth that's achieved in this piece.
This qualifies as the thing I always wanted to do but didn't, for obvious reasons. So you gotta give love to people who are like, oh yeah, I get a lot of these envelopes and want to make a collage out of it, but they just pushed it way past what I would have done. So much appreciated. Nathan Hager, I think I'm saying correctly. Hager, okay. Huddled Up Cold Morning. Now this is like a mastery of both subject and material. When you're talking about mastery of craft and painting, this is sometimes one of like the things that a lot of us strive for, especially if we're in the category of realism. So yeah, this one it just hit it out of the park.
Becky Utrecht. Don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Caribou Crossing. We were drawn to this piece just based on the combination of whimsy and practicality and skill. Like even just the stitching and the braiding in the rope, it's very well done. And it's also a little bit nostalgic because we don't tend to use those muffs anymore, and why not? Like if I had this, I'd be parading around with it all the time. So I just love this piece, and from far away, actually this is what drew me initially to this piece. From far away, it actually looks like a skein of yarn that has the wrapper on it still, like the label. And then when you get up close to it, you're like, oh my gosh, that's like, it's just such a great design. And there's a texture there that makes me want to touch it. So if you can make me feel something physically, I'm like all over your piece. I love it.
B.T. Johnson, Beast of Burden in the Land of Too Much, Too Much. Well, you know, title matches the Too Much, Too Much. And, you know, I'm just going to assume it's political. And the thing that, we discuss this a lot, but one of the things that when you do pieces that have symbolism or what have you, there is a definite tipping point where it's too much when it comes to symbolism, too much when it comes to obvious connections. But this one did a nice balance of that, both in the muted colors of the red and the blue, and then having tan, the wood color, instead of say white or something, I don't know. But then just the idea too of this piece being just kind of what seems to be all over, it definitely catches your attention for an extended period of time. Pay attention to little portions. I think when we were discussing it, we were kind of noticing things as we were talking about it, and that to me is what art can be, how it can be really fascinating, is that if we can sit there not always agreeing on a piece or an object, it also offers an opportunity to have a conversation rather than stopping the conversation. Let's continue the conversation. And I think that's where it works.
Yeah, and part of our discussion was the stars. So from the photo, you might not be able to see that there are stars on the blue portions of the piece, but you can obviously see that in the 3D image itself. And we had talked about, like, do we need the stars? Do we not need the stars? The title is too much, so the stars make sense. If the stars weren't there, would I be reading France Revolution, which is applicable too, but, so as an artist, you're just constantly making choices, and I think in this case it worked, and I think if the stars weren't there, I don't know, I mean, I think it would still work, but it worked, especially with reference to the title. Another Merit Award, Donna Budzinski, Grampus Lure. We came back to this piece based again on level of skill. The drawn portion of the lure, especially in the piece itself, more so than in the photo, there's one highlight that runs along the lure that really develops the three-dimensionality of the 2D piece itself. And using text in pieces can be really tricky because it can take people outside of the piece and into their own lens. But the reality is we all come to each piece with our own ideas and our own lenses. But here with Grampus Lure, there's a nostalgia there that I think resonates with most of us, or a lot of us. And the composition as well really works. It almost seems like the lure is floating with the way that the lures themselves are at a tilt. Like it almost seems like it's in the water, but it's just a very well done piece.
And I'll add a little bit to that too. There's some structure to this that when we integrate text into our work like this, I've done my fair share of collage work. I love doing it. I get kind of lost in it. But I found that the orientation of the text was the structure that the lure needed. And then also it was, and I don't know if this is Donna's intention, but the structure of the text being straight up and down allowed the lure, which is sort of laying there, to have movement. Does that make sense? And so then you also have those three lines on the bottom did not need to be there. They are also anchoring, excuse the pun, but anchoring the composition to give it some balance and some weight to the bottom of the piece. So yeah, it's a very good intimate piece actually. So, all right, here we go. Okay. All right, this one's fun because I really sometimes there's like the obvious beautiful thing that they're photographing. You know, these beautiful horses, yes, are gorgeous. But what's different about this piece that I've seen in a lot of photography over the years is that there is a lot of repetition happening. Not here's a horse, here's a horse, here's a horse. Not that kind of repetition. It's if you look at the horses, the line of horses, then if you look at the trees in the background, even the landscape behind those trees, you're gonna see those shades of light and dark going all the way back into the photography or the photograph. And to me, that is the part where in the editing process of deciding what this piece was going to be or do, or if this was going to make it into this show or some other show, that's where the skill of eye in photography comes into place. Because they come home with what, 1,000+ photos, and have to sift through them to get to the point. This one, I feel like it repeats a lot of things. I think we also there was certain textures that were on the forefront that was really fascinating. And then also that it's in a non-cliche stance. You know, you only have one horse that really is looking at the camera. The rest of them really don't care. And to be honest, I've seen so many horse photographs in the world that when you see this one and like the other ones are just like whatever, the only one is looking at you, that actually makes it very unique. Also, we kind of picked up on how it was framed, how it was positioned, the fact that the white horse in the middle isn't in the middle. Compositionally, it's really solid. Because you don't want to center things completely, right? Or at least that's a rule we were told at one point, right? And so there's a lot of things going on. So left to right, right to left, front to back, and everything in between. This ended up working really well.
Damien Beck, Yin Yang Station, another Excellence Award. This was a piece that was at the top of both of our lists pretty immediately. There's this yin and yang that's obvious, like the left side is the light, the right side is the dark. But there's choices being made in the coloring that draw us back into that far door. And it's hard to tell from this photograph, so take a look at the actual piece, and you'll see that metal strip on the floor has some blue coloring in it, and if you follow that line, there's a little bit of yellow and red. And either side of that line, it's all black and white. And that's a very deliberate choice, because obviously there's more color in the real world in this location. Another choice that I'm really drawn to is the fishbowl effect, where there's a curvature in the walls and it spirals, which is such a classic shape. It spirals us back to that door again. So it just has such a wonderful perspective. And is there anything you want to add about that?
No, you said it. That's
Okay. There we go. Thank you, David.
Marianne Carlson, Timberdoodle Wobbler. Okay, so this is a piece that invites you in as somewhat of a nostalgic shape, as a toy. Kind of a sharp one, come to think of it. But anyway, like it does kind of have this toy-like quality that, but from things like bunk pans, is that an oil thingy? Whatever they're called, but the design of it is nostalgic. The colors and the material used, or the combination of the materials actually, ends up just putting it on a, put it on a steampunk end, but as a style, but still very playful.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about this piece, we talked a lot about the joy and the whimsy, and just that nod to, like you said, playfulness. Greg Just, Diamonds. Gosh, in so many ways this piece just speaks for itself. skill that goes into this type of woodworking. When I think about, again, I think I've said this already, but it came up several times in this show, where my imagination goes to how did they do this? So I'm imagining maybe there's some jigs involved. Did they make the jigs? How are all these pieces like the same shape? And the design is primarily through color. And it's a lovely piece that takes a lot of skill. So thank you.
I also want to add that it's also fairly thin. And I don't do woodworking, nor do I do wood turning. But I don't always see them this thin. You know, I picked it up. I'll admit it. I touched it, and it's very light, and so I feel like if I've seen it get this thin, it usually had a nice crack in it that they said was intentional. This had no blemishes or anything like that in it. Really good piece. Oh, my turn. Jim Larson, The History Lesson. We have a lot to say about this. And it's oil, and I believe there must be oil pastels. I don't know, Jim, but I assume that there's some oil pastels in here. But what's interesting about this, the history lesson, is this there's a lot of metaphor happening in the choices of perspective. I mean, we're projecting the heck out of this thing. Our own perceptions of history and how it's being messed with right now, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that gave me away. But otherwise, there was like, the light sources are coming from different places. Even where the shadows are and everything like that was something that we noticed that. And also, there's all these little gifts inside the whole painting of that can be potentially interpreted as the viewer. And so I'm trying to think, like, it's just great. And there's a lot of distortion. I don't know if that's metaphoric, but it could be. And then there's some playfulness as well, even with the character in the background, sitting up there on a table or sitting there, whatever. There's even a lot of details about that individual that I am like fascinated with myself, not just the person in the foreground with the book. It's that other person is mischievous in what they're doing. So I found that to be so fun to look at and to dissect and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the only thing I would add about this piece is I feel like it breaks a lot of the rules and still works. Like earlier when Heidi was talking about the horse photo, how that actually follows a lot of the rules and it works really well. In this case, like Heidi mentioned, like the lighting coming from multiple directions, some of the shadows aren't matching where that lighting is coming from, and yet it still feels possible. But that's the draw to this piece for me, is like all of these things wouldn't actually exist in the real world in many ways, and yet there's a story there, and even though we don't know what the story is, like it seems like a really interesting one. Our next excellent award is David Spohn. August afternoon, and I think a lot of people here probably know David's work. He is a master, and one of the things I really like about this piece is, now I'm trying to remember where it was.
It's over here.
Okay. One of the things I really, really like about this piece is that it's a solar etching, meaning that it's actually black and white, but then he hand painted the color. And I think it would work either way. I think this piece would be just as masterful if he hadn't added the color, and yet it still works with the color. And if you look in the corners, like those little caterpillars on the bottom corners, and the cocoons on the top corners, like his work, it just tells the story of the butterfly in an extremely skilled and talented way.
All right, Linda Luce, conspiracy. Now, I'm one who's enjoying Jelly Prince, but only because I know I'm gonna fail a lot. I do it with kids, I do it with my artist friends, and we're trying to figure it all out. So in other words, Melinda, is really kind of hitting the nail on the head when it comes to what you can do with this art form, because it is fairly new. So to say that technically that this is way more challenging than we think as an art form. It's fun as all could be, but it is hard. Now this one I feel is like an illustration to a book of the world and historic events, all of that stuff. I think we saw a little bit of symbolism in this, but it is telling a story. The title helps too, but I think that this is really well done. Plus, there's certain things in here, there's techniques in here that I thought was fun for us to discuss, including, but not limited to, the glow around the large crow is, I believe, a way of kind of like the paint or whatever was sort of pushed off of a stencil of sorts. So then that way it was very brushy. It wasn't a hard stencil. It was something in the process that allowed that glow to happen. And I think that that's, like, those types of decisions are so well thought out. Maybe it was an accident 10 pieces earlier, but when in this final piece, it makes all the sense in the world. And then the scale of it is very intimate, so it does have sort of that children's book nature to it. And then the layering of the plants and such is something too that could easily go a million different ways. And so it just all works really well, a nice balance between light and dark, but that also just makes you just pay attention to the subjects.
Adrienne Benjamin, High Lady of the Night Court. Forgive me, I'm not going to say, should I try to say the in Ojibwe? Maybe we can have our artists say it. But this piece is so phenomenal because for me, just looking at the piece, I could hear it. And I wanted to see it move, and I actually started imagining this piece moving. So again, when a static piece can take me to a different place, like, I just love that elevation. I think there's so much symmetry going on here, and the mastery of the sewing, the fabrication of this piece is so high. That mastery of skill, again, just like punches me, like, oh, I can really imagine how much hard work it took to get to this level of skill. So thank you, Adrienne.
I'm going to add a little to that too. One of the things about objects that if we may or may not know the whole story, sometimes the title doesn't tell us much. And it's just, we didn't read that book, or we're not part of that community or whatever. So we may or may not look at a title for the final answer. But the quality of this is what really drew us both in. We both had different reasons why we put it in this category. I know I did. I kind of projected certain symbols in my world onto it. Whether that was right or not, there was a point where I removed that. I let that go and just looked at the craftsmanship, looked at the textures, looked at the way symmetry is being used, and so on and so forth. So this was something that, that brought us in, and we stuck with it and kept talking about it, so it makes a good piece. Oh. Amanda Kendall, my wonderful relationship between father and daughter that is very relatable, okay? And then also the medium being colored pencils. Any of us who have had to use colored pencil, there's some mastery of colored pencil, but then there's also other uses that are from when, I know when I was younger or when I worked with younger students, it can be hard to work with, literally. They're either too hard or too soft, they break, they're frustrating. But this, every little micro millimeter of this piece of paper has been given a really strong attempt of making this image. I don't know how else to say that. So like we feel the heart, the love and everything like that put into this piece. And then when you add that one little bit of the note at the bottom, I feel like this would be something we would discover in someone's kitchen on their wall next to the fridge as something to stay in their family for the rest of their lives. To me, that is what makes it, really great. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and I'll just speak a little bit about the composition itself. One of the things that drew me to this piece is the strength in that single figure of the bird swooping in. Like, the viewer can feel that protective vision in that bird's face. Like, it just feels like that bird isn't going to let anything harm its baby. And I think that speaks towards the artist. Here I am projecting. But if I were the artist in this piece, I would be saying that my dad is my protector, and I appreciate that aspect of him. And there's also a tenderness there because of that. Like there's this strength of love that comes out of this piece. Oh, it's my turn. Okay. Amanda Norholt, Still Heart, Deep Waters. I am really drawn to this piece because I love, first of all, I do love the colors. I love the composition and that the river, that waterway is snaking to the back of the piece. And yet there's a very bird's eye view, aerial view, drone view, whatever words you choose to apply. The viewer feels like you're looking at it from above. And from farther away, I almost felt like the painting was undulating, like from bottom to top. So there's a movement there. And I think other artists would make different choices in terms of having the background. Maybe the trees would be smaller in the background and fade out into the background. But I really enjoy that the artist didn't do that with this piece, because it almost feels like we really are flying above. So thank you, Amanda.
And I think I want to add a little more to that because perspective is key, and also across the room versus up close. All the time when we make artwork, sometimes we get that choice of how close people get to it or how far away they are from it. And as the viewer, because this is our job today, is to really get into the work. If we did have to figure out our perspective, because it's a big piece. If it was like, 6 inches higher, it probably would have fit our eye level just right, And so there's also some other things that are happening in it that's not neither here nor there, but enjoyable. It's the textures within the water. It's within the water. It's not the surface of the water anymore. I don't know if that was intentional, but there's something about what's happening under the water surface that is making it interesting, which anybody who has a relationship to water, whether it's fleeting or you live on the water or whatever, you know that exists sometimes, where you can see stuff underneath, which I think that's kind of came up with the frog piece earlier, is that idea of what's happening underneath is just as important as what we see above it.
Yeah, and I think in that case, the title is very fitting, the Still Heart, Deep Waters, because we do have this surface stillness and the depth in the water. So, nice title. So my Judge's Choice Award went to Mike Manasco, recording the deliciousness of her latest victim's last words. What really spoke to me about this piece was the mastery of skill. And I feel like I keep saying that, but gosh, I think that's a common theme in this show in general. There's a lot of mastery of skill here. This particular piece, again, is in colored pencil, which is super hard to render such depth. So we can actually see the background in this image a little more clearly in the photograph than you can in the piece itself. And so in the piece itself, that upper background kind of disappears and allows you to discover it. You don't see it right away. And that subtlety is really hard to achieve in colored pencil. And I'm also really enjoying the shirt that she's wearing in terms of, in some places it has this opacity and yet in other places it's transparent. And it works throughout. The folds of the clothing are really well done. And even just like the thought of the deliciousness of her latest victim's last words, how she's recording them from the head's tongue onto the page. So it's building a story that I want to know a little bit more. So congratulations, Mike. What a wonderful piece.
That's one of those movies you gotta get to the end and understand how it ends so you can go back to sleep. So fully aware that it is a very graphic, scary piece. It's still like, but it is such a good frame of like a bigger story and a bigger action. So I think it's a great choice. All right, but my Judge's Choice is Nicole Lidman, Sharpened Thoughts. Many thoughts has gone through my head while doing dishes. And this is, I think, a really great snapshot of someone's life. Not only the life of their everyday objects, but also of their own hands, cleaning it up, taking care of it. And one of the things about paintings that record everyday life is the artist's decision to leave something in versus taking something out. And so this piece in particular has some objects in it that are not catching your attention maybe right away, like the skull cup. I don't know if it almost looks like one of those plastic cups that you have a screw on the lid or something like that. And then the little golden mouse up in the top corner, and then the silverware just haphazardly going off the edge of the canvas. Even the tattoos, you've got the faded tattoos versus the more new crisp tattoo. I mean, there's so many little details here that are, it's not as well curated as possibly the black and gold decor, to be honest, if you look at it that way too. So there's a lot being said here. I appreciated other things too. There's a lot of balance when it comes to the use of color. The black and the white and gold is like a really interesting approach to documenting one's life. And then I frankly had a fixation on the bubbles. I was all about the bubbles. But yeah.
One of the things that I enjoyed about this piece was, again, where my imagination went, and it brought me to a place of times when I've done the dishes and let my mind wander. And for me, oftentimes, my dish wandering thoughts aren't very positive because I have these negative feelings about doing the work in the household with just my 16-year-old.